By the mid-2000s, M. Night Shyamalan could seemingly do no wrong. He had become one of the most successful directors in Hollywood after creating one of the biggest grossing horror films of all time with The Sixth Sense, then achieving even more huge success with his follow-ups Unbreakable, Signs, and The Village. By 2008, Shyamalan was in a position to make virtually anything he wanted on a big Hollywood budget. He chose to make a movie that paid homage to monster B-movies of the 50s and natural disaster movies of the 70s. Made for $60 million, The Happening, whilst commercially successful, became a huge critical flop and is generally considered to be one of the worst movies ever made. Cut to 13 years later, after Shyamalan's cataclysmic fall from grace, he decided to return to similar ground and make another natural eco-horror film, but this time on a third of the budget, taking place mainly in one location, a beach. A beach that has strange, eerie effects on its human inhabitants. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of nature in horror, and we discuss two divisive Shyamalan horror films, The Happening and Old. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Muncer, and as ever, I am your host. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre, one subgenre at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 10th season exploring the evolution of nature biting back in horror, and this is part 28. I hope you all had an awesome Christmas and enjoyed the holidays. What better time to cozy on the sofa and watch the two movies that we're covering this week? As that intro suggested, we are going to be discussing The Happening from 2008 and Old from 2021. It's an M. Night Shyamalan double bill. Both of these discussions will be spoilerific, and you know what Shyamalan's like with his twists. You don't want to get it spoiled for yourself. Give both movies a watch before you listen to our discussion. So joining me to discuss these two absolute gems, a very good friend of mine. He was last here in our home invasion season to discuss Better Watch Out and Housebound with me, but you may also know him from the Empire podcast or the Disneyversity podcast. A big welcome back to Ben Travis. Hello, Ben.
Hello, it's good to be back.
So lovely to have you back. How's life? You've had a busy 2024, that's right?
I've had a busy 2024. I've just moved house. I've moved out of London. I live in Liverpool now. In less than a week, as we record this, I should be a dad for the first time.
Woo!
So it's all kicking off. Thank you. Big year. Lots of stuff happening. Capital H, The Happening. Yeah. It's been my 2024. And I feel very capital O old as a result.
Beautifully. But what a beautiful segue from your intro as well. I love that, Ben. Thank you. Always a pleasure to have you here. As you know, Ben, we're talking about Nature Bites Back this season. So we're dealing with eco-horror movies, nature horror movies, animal attack movies, all of that kind of thing. What are your thoughts generally, Ben, on these types of movies? Are you kind of a fan of these types of films?
I do generally enjoy these films, and I think because there's a universal relatability to them of that kind of primal, something's coming for you, some natural thing is happening, how do you react to that situation, that everybody can kind of relate to in the same way. At the same time, I think I can watch these films with an element of distance, because whenever it's like, this person has gone in the sea and something bad has happened, or this person has strayed off this trail on a remote hiking holiday, I'm like, that's just never going to be me. I would not make those choices. I like to play it safe. I don't like the ocean. I don't like going off the beaten path. So I think I can enjoy them with a bit of distance of just like, I just don't think I'm going to find myself in these horrible situations. Versus, as you say, last season when it was home invasion, what if something is inflicted on you when you live I'm just simply not going out into the wilderness, so I feel like I don't have to worry about the things that these films often bring up.
I love that, yeah, and that was gonna bring me on to the next thing I was gonna ask you, Ben, about how you generally in life are when you're like out there at one with nature, with the elements. Like, are you a very outdoorsy person? Have you got any particular phobias or anything like that?
I'm not a massively outdoorsy person. If I could go the rest of my life without ever sleeping in a tent again, I would be very, very happy. I think the last time I did it was some kind of festival that I was covering like nearly a decade ago in this shitty little pop-up tent that I got for like 20 quid off Amazon, and me and my now wife were in this tent that every time we moved, rain came through the top of the tent, and I was like, I can't do this again. I'm done with camping. It's not my vibe, not into it. So I'm not the outdoorsiest person, and I do get scared going in the ocean as well. I think just like Jaws has seen me off the ocean for life. And even like a bit of seaweed will brush my leg.
Oh.
And I'm like, that's a jellyfish. That's definitely a jellyfish. And I'm going to die.
100%. 100%. I'm exactly the same. Just give me a nice swimming pool. Just give me a man-made, chlorine, chemical-filled swimming pool.
And I can see everything. Also, I'm really blind. I wear glasses and my eyesight is terrible. So when I go in the ocean, I'm like, I want my glasses on so that I can see anything in the water. I'm not built for that life. And yeah, I'm kind of a bit scared of everything as well. This is making me sound like an absolute wuss, which I guess I am. But
no, I think you're right there with so many of us on this who have been on this series, like film fans, horror fans. We'd all rather be at home with our creature comforts, I think.
Yeah, we like to be on the sofa with a spooky movie on, not in the outdoors. Yep. I'm bad with spiders and all kinds of creepy crawlies. Ooh, can I tell you my main story of like nature-based moderate trauma?
Yes, please.
Which I think sort of bridges the previous season of Home Invasion to your Nature Bites Back series. So a couple of years ago, I'm living in Herne Hill in South London, and it's like early hours of the morning, and I can hear or sort of feel my sleepy brain is aware of something that basically sounds like almost someone crinkling a paper bag next to my head. And I'm like, that's really weird. And it sort of wakes me up, but I'm drifting back to sleep. And then about an hour later, I wake up again, and I can sort of still hear the kind of crinkly bag feeling. Drift off back to sleep. Then it's probably about 6:30 in the morning. And I'm like, oh no, I can definitely hear, and worse than that, feel something like moving inside my ear.
No,
and so
what?
I immediately Google bug in ear ? What to do? Help. And it comes up, and it's like, this is a thing. This happens. Bugs get in people's ears in the night, and if you think that's happened to you, you will hear this strange kind of crinkling sensation, but don't put your finger in your ear, because you just push whatever's in there further into your head. And I'm like, oh my god, I've just been sticking my finger right down my ear. It says what you have to do is warm up a little bit of oil, like olive oil or something, and warm it up, pour it into the ear, and that should like flush out whatever's happening. So I have to wake up Lizzie, my partner, and say, it's 6:30 in the morning, you're going to think I'm nuts, but I'm pretty sure there's something in my ear, and I need you to go to the kitchen and heat up this oil and pour it into my ear, and because there's something in there. She thinks I'm mad. Anyway, she goes and does it. She comes back with a little spoonful of oil. My head is on the pillow. She pours it in my ear, and I feel something like shrivel and die in my ear.
Oh my God.
It then like floats up on the oil. So the warmth of the oil kills it, and then it floats on the oil. And yeah, a spider crawled into my ear in the night, and I could like hear it and feel it in my head. It invaded the home that was my head. Nature bit back.
Jesus Christ.
I'm bad with spiders anyway. It was a terrible experience. And if you ever think you've had that happen to you, you may have to wake up somebody and say, get some oil, warm it up, pour it in my ear. It was horrendous.
Ben, that's one of the most horrible stories I think I've ever been told on this podcast. That is absolutely horrific. Like, the idea of things going in my ears.
I would rather have a spider crawl in my mouth, I think, than my ear. You know what I mean? Like, there's something about it crawling in my ear, like being that close to my brain and being really deep inside. I just really don't like it. That's horrific.
Horrible. Well, I'm sort of, I think that's a badge of honor. I'm kind of glad to have shared that with everybody listening today.
Yeah, I love it. It's a good story. It's very good. I'm at the moment where we're recording this, I'm staying in a random like log cabin on my own in the middle of the countryside. And I was told by the guy who sort of showed me around the cabin. He was very nice and he showed me how everything works. And he was like, just by the way, keep the gate closed outside because like wild boar do kind of just like roam around here, and they can start digging things up and they can get a bit aggressive. Like, you'll probably be fine, but just like you wouldn't want them outside. God. And I was like, what? And I'm just in like Wales. I had no idea that wild boar were a thing in the UK or in Wales. I feel like I'm on the island in Lost now or something. Like, I'm just going to see a wild boar just like charge at me in the night. So I'm not going outside when it gets dark, basically, for fear of wild boar. So
it could unlock your inner John Locke, though. You never know.
Maybe, exactly. Yeah. So we're going to talk about The Happening and Old this week. I'm so excited, Ben. I can't wait to discuss these movies with you. We should start off by talking a little bit about M. Night, obviously, like both M. Night Shyamalan films. I've already discussed a few on the main podcast before. I've obviously done The Sixth Sense in our Ghost series, and we did Signs in our Alien Invasion series. What do you think of M. Night generally? I feel like everyone's got an opinion on him and on his work, right? Like, what are your thoughts on M. Night Shyamalan, Ben?
I have a soft spot for him, and I think increasingly he is one of those filmmakers where you're like, I don't know if he's going to make something good, but he's going to make something interesting and idiosyncratic. And increasingly, that's kind of what I look for. I think when you're in this world and you watch as many films as we do, you're kind of looking for something interesting and weird, even if it's like a 2-star film but that was bonkers, versus something that was like a perfectly serviceable 3 stars that you're going to forget in a day after you've seen it.
Yes.
There's something about the patch that Shyamalan's in at the moment that is just weird, and I have to celebrate it because he is self-funding a lot of his current projects and he's really betting on himself and often coming out on top, and I really appreciate that. And I grew up on his films, like, I think The Visit was maybe one of the first films that I went to see sort of on my own when I was old enough to go to the cinema by myself, and I'd seen Signs, I'd probably seen Unbreakable. I'm not sure if I'd seen The Sixth Sense at that point, but like, he was a named filmmaker. You'd go and see the new M. Night Shyamalan film, and I must have been, I don't know, maybe 13, 14 when The Village came out. And so this is a filmmaker who I've grown up alongside, and I've dipped out when he went really, really bad for a while. And when I first saw The Happening, I was like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. And maybe it still kind of is, but there's a lot to talk about in it. So he's just a fascinating guy because he can make stuff that is profound and beautifully made, and with these really smart twists and interesting characters. And then he can just make something like The Happening where at every turn you're like, what is the thought process behind this? In a way that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Like, I've always been a bit of an M. Night apologist. Like, I can't help myself. Like, I'm not going to say that all of his films are good. Some of them are really bad, but there is something about the way he makes films, the stories he comes up with. Like you say, there's kind of, at least they're never by the numbers and bland, right? I mean, in fact, I think his biggest kind of dip for me was when he went into by the numbers bland with like After Earth or whatever it was called, the Will Smith and Jaden Smith one. Like, I think, generally speaking, you're going to see something that is going to give you a reaction in one way or another. And I think the thing with him as well, and also I love that he kind of, I guess like this is a good and a bad thing with M. Night, is that he is kind of, his films tend to always be in some way kind of very much, he puts himself front and center, right? It's very much, this is an M. Night Shyamalan film. He wants everyone to know that it's an M. Night Shyamalan film. And I think he is the biggest fan of his work out of everyone, right?
And you can tell because he always casts himself in little roles where he's basically the hero.
Right. And I love that he he uncynically, I think, puts all of himself into every story he makes, it feels like. And so I think sometimes they're quite earnest and sometimes they're easy to laugh at for that reason. But I also love that he never just takes a gig doing a franchise movie or anything. Like, he will always just make his own stuff his own way. Like you say, he is self-funding it. I think he's generally a pretty decent guy. I think he casts interesting, diverse people in his films. Like, I think he's one of the good ones. He just makes films that are so fucking off the wall that you think, what on earth was the thought process? And it can go from so off the wall and so bad to, holy shit, this is one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. It's sublime. Yeah. Exactly. So it's a really hard thing to kind of fall in one camp or another for him, in my opinion. But I don't think the rest of the world thinks that. I think he's become a bit of a joke, hasn't he? You know, there was a period when M. Night Shyamalan's name would come up in a trailer and people would laugh or groan in a cinema, you know, like he got that reaction from a mainstream audience, you know.
I think he's evolved his reputation, though, because it's gone from, like, you're the twist guy to you're the guy who just makes bonkers shit that has, like, a really hooky high concept.
So, basically. Yeah,
exactly. But we need that in the mix, you know. We need a bit of that Maverick M. Night energy in the landscape. So, you know, I'm pleased he's out there doing his thing.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and I think he's a really good director. I think his problem is his writing. I think if you know, if I was to say he's better at one thing than another, I would say he's a much better director than he is a writer. I think he's got some amazing kind of instincts in terms of visuals, the way he films and edits certain set pieces. I think he's amazing at tension and suspense when he wants to be. But sometimes the writing and the performances in his movies, which again we'll get to tonight, are just, again, you just think, what was the thought process that went into that, you know? If any at all.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, what did you think of Trap this year? Did you watch Trap?
I still haven't seen Trap, and it's killing me because we did a big feature with him in Empire magazine for the film coming out, and one of the quotes there was like, oh, my idea was, what if Silence of the Lambs happened at a Taylor Swift concert? And I was like, that's the only movie I ever need to see for the rest of my life. That's incredible. And we're in this amazing era of Josh Hartnett doing really cool things, and it's his doting dad movie about a dad taking his daughter to a concert, but it's also the film he made with his daughter, the pop star, as the pop star on stage. And so I'm really excited to see it, but I haven't seen it. I missed it at cinemas. It feels like it kind of came and went, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah.
Did you catch it?
I did. And let me tell you, Ben, it's not the Silence of the Lambs at a Taylor Swift concert. I mean, that is. I don't think you can make that comparison, sadly. But I can't help but quite enjoy it. I had quite a lot of fun with it. It's not good.
Yeah.
It's a pretty bad movie. And, you know, I watched it with some of my co-hosts and we discussed it together on Patreon, and I was the most positive person about it. I think a couple of other people, Becky, absolutely hated it and thought it was the biggest piece of shit she had ever seen. So, like, again, as ever, his movie's really dividing people, but I would say it's worth a watch, Ben, when you get a chance.
Yeah.
You know, it's quite fun.
Whenever it pops up on Sky TV, I'm going to be there.
I think the thing about him, and we'll talk about this in a minute when we get into The Happening, and this was the case with Trap, is how aware is he of how ridiculous this is? Like, is he in on the joke? Like, I never quite know with Shyamalan whether I'm laughing at him or with him in some of his films. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's something that, like, is also the evolving part of his legacy, and what we as viewers are kind of reappraising our understanding of him. Because to me, I think it's really interesting. We'll get into it all as we discuss the films, but, like, The Happening makes so much more sense to me in a post-old world.
Yes.
And at the time, I think The Happening, you know, he generally still was just like the twist guy, and the guy who not that long ago had made The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable. And I'm a massive fan of Signs as well. Like, at the very ending, but the majority of Signs is incredible and so Spielbergian, and the craft of it is unbelievable.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So then when The Happening comes out, obviously he's had Lady in the Water. And everyone's gone, what are you doing? When you revisit bits of that film, so like the monsters are called like the Scrunts, a bunch of Scrunts in that
Noths and
film.
Scrunts and absolutely
God.
mental. Yeah.
To go from that to The Happening was such like a weird switcheroo for audiences of like, oh, you were this guy, but what are you doing making this? Not just in terms of changing genre or anything, but like, have you just completely lost the plot? And then I think in a post-old world where you feel his idiosyncrasies and his love for like old B movies and things being weirdly mannered for reasons that you as a viewer have to kind of discern for yourself. It's like, no, we were just sort of seeing a different mode of his filmmaking, and now because other bits of his work have followed on in that vein, it's like this is we were sort of seeing the genesis of a different side of M. Night that I don't think we still fully understand. And yet we can accept it a bit more as like, this is what M. Night does versus, hey, he made all these amazing films and then he made The Happening, and what the fuck was that? Which was what the feeling was at the time.
I think that's right. Yeah, it's almost like you can split his career into kind of three sort of segments, where you've got those first few movies that were generally pretty loved by people. The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable Signs, The Village, kind of, right? Like those movies, I think most people, people have issues with, but generally speaking, they were pretty good, pretty successful films. Then you move into The Lady in the Water and then The Happening, and then he has his real bad phase, I think, like the Last Airbender and After Earth and stuff, where he was given bigger budgets and that clearly just didn't work for him, right? I think he was just like, he bought into his own hype too much. He had too much power and his films were absolutely terrible. And The Happening is very much on the cusp of that, like, downfall of Night. And then he kind of had to start again from scratch, right? He kind of like ruined his own career. And then he had to go back to micro budget genre movies, working with Blumhouse for The Visit, Split, Glass, and kind of returning to his roots a little bit, returning to his kind of high concept genre films, much smaller, like you say, self-financed. And again, like, I think that, people have started to enjoy his stuff again. I think his problem is when he reaches too much of a giddy height, right? I think it's not good for M. Night by the sounds.
He can be a bit hubristic.
Yes, indeed. So let's get into it. Let's begin by talking about The Happening from 2008. Oh man, Ben, tell people, for people who don't know, briefly, what's the story of The Happening?
Okay, so The Happening takes place in Philadelphia, because this is an M. Night Shyamalan movie, and it sees the world undergoing, or specifically the northeast of the USA, undergoing this bizarre phenomenon where people are, going about their business one minute and then they stop suddenly in the street, or they start talking nonsense, or they start walking backwards, and that is then followed by them killing themselves or actively putting themselves in harm's way. And this phenomenon starts to spread. It begins in New York. It then spreads to Philadelphia and other areas. And so you follow Marky Mark Wahlberg as a school teacher called Elliot, his wife Alma, played by Zooey Deschanel, and they have a daughter Jess. And so we follow them trying to escape from Philadelphia, but they're also trying to figure out, like, what is happening, what is causing it, and how are they going to survive. And the outcome of that is, this being the Nature Bites Back series, it's some kind of bizarre natural phenomenon that is in the air. It is emanating from the trees. It is emanating from, I don't know, Mother Earth itself, and sort of fighting back against people in ways that even by the end of the film we don't fully comprehend. And so we have our characters starting to understand that that is what's happening, and then freaking out whenever there's a little bit of wind, or whenever they see grass swaying in the breeze. Everybody panics and runs, and they're like, what, are there too many people close together? Is that triggering it? What happens when we split apart? And yeah, it's a largely bad film.
Yeah.
That has so much interesting stuff going on in it that I feel like through the course of our conversation we're going to pick up so many things of, like, it's kind of tapping into this and it's getting into that feeling and it's got this idea, and there's so much going on in it. But as you actually watch the film minute by minute, the performances are bizarre. some of the sequences are really genuinely quite like shocking and unnerving, but it is just a bonkers movie. Tonally, it's so deeply strange. So I can't wait to get into it all.
Yeah. So you mentioned like when you first saw this, you thought it was straight up terrible, did you? Like, do you remember when you first saw it, Ben?
Yeah, probably slightly shamefully. I think I probably like torrented it or something. I was still a teenager. I was living back at my mum and dad's. And yeah, there is something about this film with, we'll get into it, but like Mark Wahlberg's performance is like he's never heard a human being speak before, or hear or have a conversation with any other person in the world, and everything he's hearing is like he's hearing words for the first time. Kind of the same for Zooey Deschanel, and you know, elements of it are super wacky. Then other bits of it are really like surprisingly harsh and bleak.
Yes,
after being really goofy 1 minute. And so I think, especially as a teenager, I was just like, this is shit. This is so bad.
Yeah.
Even, you know, with my largely uncritical brain, I know that these are bad performances, and I know that this is all over the place. It was probably an early example because it's so extreme in everything it's doing. Even as a young viewer, you can watch it and be like, I think this is what a bad movie is.
Yeah.
At the same time, I do quite enjoy it now. I didn't dislike rewatching it for this podcast, and yet I do still think it is bad.
Yeah, I would echo everything you've just said, really. I saw it at the cinema. I would have been at uni when I watched this. I remember going to see it with my girlfriend at the time, a big M. Night fan. Even at the time, you know, I think he was one of those early directors that I got into as a film. Like, he, you know, like you say, that kind of, that time when you're a kind of burdening cinephile and you start to realise, like, what bad films are, what good films are, what good filmmakers are. And I think M. Night was one of those early sort of filmmakers that I remember latching onto of our sort of generation when we were growing up, who I was like, I like this guy's films. I saw Unbreakable at the cinema, I saw Signs at the cinema, I saw The Village at the cinema, I saw Lady in the Water at the cinema. So I remember like specifically being like, I see every M. Night film now, like this is my thing. And I was deeply hurt by The Happening when I first watched it. I was like, holy shit, I cannot defend this movie. This is dreadful. Everything about it was dreadful. And I was grumpy about it. And I've now seen it probably about 4 times. I think I've probably seen it about 3 times since that first cinema trip. And do you know what? Every time I watch it, I have more and more fun with it. Yeah. I actually would not put this even in the bottom 3 M. Night Shyamalan films anymore, you know, for me. I think he's done way worse films, and I think as stupid as this movie is in places, and you're absolutely right what you said about at some point it's really cartoony, like it's trying to be a wacky comedy. Other times you've got like kids being shot in the head with shotguns, like that you just see on screen. Yeah. I watched it last night in my little cabin, and I think just out of pure shock and discomfort, I bellowed out loud, like laughed at that moment, because I had forgotten that moment happened when the little shotgun comes out of the door and just blows that kid's brains out, and it just shows it on screen. I was like, what is this movie? You know?
And it's 2 kids get killed by this like rogue shooter, and it's immediately after Mark Wahlberg is at the front of the house singing, hello, we're normal people, see, we're normal people, you can let us in. And then these 2 kids get blown away, and as the kids are getting blown away, which is again really shocking and horrifying, we have like a slow-mo shot of Mark Wahlberg going, ooh, Joey, or something like this. It's like, what are the choices being made here? It's wild. Absolutely
exactly
wild.
What are the choices being made? And that's what I want to know. I still can't make up my mind about it, Ben. Like, is M. Night Shyamalan trying to make a silly, funny movie here, or is he trying to take it seriously? Because there's stuff in this movie that is really fucking dark, and I do think that some of the images of the suicides and stuff, some of them are really effective.
Absolutely.
And then you've got this Marky Mark talking to a plant, and that being a joke and a punchline and stuff. Like, I don't know what he's going for with this movie, you know?
It's something where the bits that you logically go, okay, well, that is delivered as a joke. Marky Mark apologizing to a plant, touching the leaf and going, plastic.
Yes.
That is a joke. The construction of that is a joke.
Absolutely.
The delivery of it is exactly the same as a non-joke line of dialogue in this film.
Yeah.
At the same time, everybody is like playing on a very similar register. So you've got Marky Mark, who's doing this weird it's such a weirdly like naive performance. That's why I say it's like he's never heard a human speak before, because he's constantly got this like air of surprise about him, and he's almost weirdly childish. Zooey Deschanel as his wife is a character who it's kind of hinted at through the film, or it's made moderately explicit that she's neurodivergent, and so they build that into moments, but also she's playing on a very similar register to Marky Mark. John Leguizamo is in this, and he's also playing on this like slightly uncanny register as well. And I'm like, this then has to be some kind of choice. You don't get these actors all just happening, capital H, to give these styles of performances. So what references has Shyamalan give them? What direction is he giving them to not just... It's not that Mark Wahlberg is like an outlier in this. The whole film has the tone of Mark Wahlberg's performance throughout, which makes you feel like it has to be a choice, like it has to be intentional, there has to be something he was going for here. But because, as we said, those tones are so blurred that the jokes kind of play weirdly serious and the serious bits play like jokes, you can't unpick it from one moment to the next. It's really bizarre.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's really hard to unpick exactly what the choices that are being made. It feels like, and I think he's talked about it before, that this movie is a kind of throwback to the kind of monster movies of the 50s, right? I mean, I think, and the 60s, like, I think, he loves, obviously, famously, he loves Hitchcock, and he was even, branded as like the new Hitchcock when he first started his career. I think, he's trying to do The Birds. He's trying to do, and then those other kind of 50s monster movies like The Blob or whatever, like, and they are kind of like drive-in B movies, I guess. So I think that's what it is. I think he's going for a B movie vibe, but then there's that M. Night-ness bursting out where he wants to make something a bit serious and profound as well. And I think those two elements are what are butting heads, right? He can't make up his mind whether he's making a 50s B movie or whether he's making a post 9/11 M. Night Shyamalan movie, and I think that's where it's so awkward.
And I think even the B movie stuff is like weird. It's like an alien's idea of what a 50s B movie would be, because I don't know, my idea of that would be, hey, I don't know, you got a military man with a giant ant attacking, and he's talking to his radio saying, hey, there's a thing here at 5 o'clock and we must go and shoot the bugs. But what we have here is like the guy who's obsessed with hot dogs. He's like, what do you guys think about hot dogs? They've got a good shape, they've got protein. I'm like, what? Even that stuff is like... Okay, I get the sense that is playing into the B-movie flavour, but in a way that I've never seen before. That is so deeply strange.
It's really strange. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And, there are things about it that he did really well in Signs. Like, Signs, in a way, was also like an M. Night Shyamalan version. Well, I guess, like, all of these movies, like, Unbreakable is an M. Night Shyamalan version of a hero origin story, right? And it was amazing and interesting and different. Signs was an M. Night Shyamalan version of an alien attack movie. And rather than seeing, like, Independence Day style military versus the aliens, we're focusing in on one quiet farmhouse and one family, and we're seeing everything else through the news. And he's sort of trying again to do that here, isn't he? He's trying to do a big 70s style or 50s style natural disaster movie or monster movie, but do it in this M. Night Shyamalan way where it's kind of quiet and pensive and thoughtful, and there's odd, quirky, kooky characters. But again, like, it doesn't feel like it kind of works in anything it's going for that reason,
I think one of the things with that flavour that he's going for, though, one that really stands out is, I think the music is really good. I think the music knows what this film is. James Newton Howard does the score, and that gives you the feeling of like a throwbacky monster movie. And so that, I think, is going a long way towards helping solidify what the tone of this is meant to be. But that almost then plays at odds against some of the performances and some of the choices. And as you say, the dialogue, Shyamalan dialogue
is... Oh, my God.
I kind of love it because it's so deeply strange. And again, I've said it many times already, but it just sounds like people who have never spoken to another human before trying to discern what conversation should be. And so when those dialogue scenes occur, you're just entertained by the weirdness of it. And I don't feel like that was always the case in the early films. That feels like something that has become more extreme as his career's gone on. Sure.
Totally. I think that's true. You know, like when from the second this film starts, when Mark Wahlberg is teaching that class, and he's the first thing he's like, hey, did you guys know that there's honeybees and honeybees are disappearing? And, blah, blah, blah. And he just launches into these things that, again, doesn't sound like a human being talking to another human being. And it, like you say, it just then carries that tone through for the rest of the thing. If I'm being really generous, is there something that he's saying about, because part of the sort of, what do you call it, like affliction that you get if you're infected by this toxin is that you start talking nonsensically, right? Like you start to repeat sentences and say things that don't make sense. Is there a bit of it that's like, well, the dialogue, there's already a bit of that. There's already a bit of uncanny, nonsensical communication within human beings anyway, right? And like, I don't know. But like, I think that's a really interesting thing, that there's actually, as part of the story, your speech goes mental, right? Like that's even part of the lore.
Start saying odd shit.
Yeah, exactly. So that is what makes that whole thing even stranger, that the dialogue is as strange as it is.
But then I'm like, is that supposed to be like a bit of, as you say, textural playfulness of like already people are, talking weirdly. So what is somebody talking in a weird way and what's not?
Yeah, like we're not communicating as a species or whatever. You know?
And the other thing that I got was like, I guess this becomes more prevalent as the happening continues to happen, but like how, it's trying to almost get a sense of like how weird it is to try and act normal when the world is ending, which I think is something that we have had to get used to with everything that happened during the pandemic, of like the world feels like it's falling apart, and yet also things are kind of normal at the same time. There's a weird like banality to a lot of what's going on here. It's very like just low key. It's just people in cars driving away and getting in squabbles and talking about hot dogs and going like, oh, should we shack up here for a bit? Will that help? What if we close the door? And so there's you've got all these people in these extremely not normal situations having to try and like pretend to be normal while everything isn't. And so is that part of the mannered nature of the dialogue, or is it just Shyamalan? Yeah. Or is it just something that makes it, a bit of a thriller element of like, ooh, has that person gone off the plot, or does he just love hot dogs? I don't know.
Yeah, I know. It's so baffling, and it's kind of fascinating. And that's the thing, like, that's why this film is not a chore to watch. I think it's kind of really interesting. Like I'm never bored watching this movie, right? Like it really is a kind of like, you can't quite believe what you're seeing from minute one. What do you think of the actual kind of the horror, I suppose, of, you get that opening scene? And this is where I do think in some ways this movie does have some quite frightening, startling images. Like I think, as silly as it is, again, it is quite silly that when you get infected by this thing, what do? You start talking weirdly, then you start walking backwards, and then you freeze, and then you kill yourself, right? Really silly. Like that's like some Airplane, here's what happens when you eat the poisoned fish kind of like stuff, right? But but it does lead to some, what I found quite startling images of like the people falling off buildings, or people 100%. Just standing still in the park or whatever. Like, how did you find like the horror direction, I suppose, that this film took?
Really good, because Shyamalan is great at doing these sequences, and he's already made a handful of films that are outstanding in those areas too. So as you say, the people chucking themselves off the top of the roof, and the impact of that. And obviously the first person goes, and all the builders go over, and they're like, oh my god, our mate's chucked himself off and then they just keep coming, and then you see there's loads of people flinging themselves off, and that's really upsetting. There's a great sequence and brilliantly shot as well, where a guy shoots himself in a car, and then somebody else goes and picks up the gun, and they walk a bit and they kill themselves with the gun, and the camera is like following the gun as it's passed between all these different people, as they kind of kill themselves, and then somebody else picks it up.
Yeah,
that's really impressive. Even the scene where the guy goes into the lion enclosure and has his arms ripped off by the lions. It's kind of, comedically over the top. He has one arm ripped off and then the other arm's ripped off.
Yeah.
You could play that as a comedy scene. But there's something, this film isn't afraid to get gory. It's so stupid and almost childish in some ways, but then also it goes quite hard in the horror element, and doesn't shy away from kind of, you see that guy's arm stretch and all the skin rip as it's being ripped off, and that's oh god, that's pretty hardcore.
Yeah, it's probably his most visually gory film to date at this point in his career, I would say, right? Yeah.
Because he always flirts with horror, but he's kind of flirting on the edge of horror, and maybe this one actually he goes further into that. But the thing with the lion sequence as well is as I think, especially when you watch this film now, it's so many things at the same time, because it's absolutely an environment movie. There's a reason we're doing it in Nature Bites Back.
Yeah.
It's the earth fighting back. At the same time, it's very much a post 9/11 movie, as a lot of Shyamalan films are. Signs is massively post 9/11. This is also post 9/11 because nobody in this film can conceive that it's anything else but a terrorist attack. Everybody's well, it's an attack, or we think the terrorists are here, or that's just the mind frame that everybody is in through this film. At the same time, the lion sequence, they see the lion attack on somebody's iPhone. It's a really early iPhone. I'm this is an early iPhone movie, an early social media movie.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We are at a point in time where the worst things are happening around the world all the time, and suddenly we have access to it all, and we're seeing it all happening. And this film brings up weirdly big questions of are we killing ourselves? Are we killing the planet? Yeah. Is the planet killing us? To what extent are we destroying ourselves in all sorts of different ways? And all of that is packed into this sincerely stupid movie. It's wild.
Exactly. I think that's what it is, right? I think it's that he does want to ponder those big questions and themes, and he can't help himself, and so he does have all of that serious, interesting subject matter within the madness, and it just doesn't quite fit. But again, fascinating to actually unpick and talk about. And I think, it really did capture that. Signs really kind of captured that more that idea of kind of being under attack, physically being under attack, right? It was released 1 year after 9/11, and it very much had that kind of vibe to it. The Village was also his kind of reaction to sort of isolationism of America, right?
Massively.
Fearing the outsider as well. So he was working through this with so many of his movies, and The Happening at its best, like in that opening sequence, I think it really taps into, and I remember this very clearly in the mid-2000s, how scared everyone was of a biological weapon, right? And what it would, no one would know what it would look like, what form it would take, something will suddenly happen in a busy, crowded, square in a city or whatever. And I think, again, just evoking that fear at the time, I think he does an amazing job at that kind of thing, at the kind of disorientation and bewilderment of something is going on here, something bad. The soundscape too, where you hear screams in the distance sometimes in busy cities, or the gun, and just that idea of a kind of epidemic of suicides is a really dark, horrible thought too. And again, for the most part, I think he pulls them off really well. I think the gunshots, anything involving guns, I think is really creepy and disturbing. And I think you're right, the lion attack is right on the cusp. I think where it pushes over to me, again, another moment when I laughed in a very dark way, is the guy lying in front of the lawnmower.
Yes. It's so extreme. It's almost like something out of a really schlocky, gory horror film,
Yeah.
It's so, but then I think the film does a good job of riding the line in those moments between what is silly and what's disturbing, because to see somebody actively put themselves in harm's way, they say that whatever is happening sort of disinhibits the bit of your brain that tells you not to harm yourself.
Yes.
And so to see people willingly put themselves in harm's way and just inevitably await what is coming to them is kind of horrifying. But then it plays out these scenarios that are almost Looney Tunes-ish. I'm surprised a piano didn't fall on somebody at some point in this film. It's daft.
It's like a Jackass stunt gone wrong or something, isn't it? Like, it's really strange. You don't know how to react to it, or like a Final Destination sequence maybe or something, right? Like, it's so over the top that you just kind of want to laugh at it as well. So again, like, it just sits in a real weird, uncomfortable place in that regard. And I think those scenes work in isolation. I think then for me what really doesn't work, and this is a really hard thing to get right, I've talked about it already this series when we talked about stuff like Day of the Triffids and things, like, how do you make plants frightening, right? Like, it's like, how do you do it? But, you know, there's this kind of reveal, I guess, sort of midway through the movie that it's not a biological weapon, it's not human beings doing this, it's nature, right? Nature biting back. There is the trees or the plants are communicating with each other. They are releasing a kind of toxin, and they're getting revenge on humans for the way that humans have treated the planet, essentially, right? And are wiping people out. And so what you get then are these moments of Shyamalan suspense where you'll get a shot of a tree blowing in the wind, and suddenly everyone will go quiet and look at it and have to run away or whatever. And I don't know, like, that stuff, how do you make that scary? It just doesn't work.
Know. Because, like, that's part of the thing that he's trying to get across is, like, you can't outrun the wind. The wind will always be there. But at the same time, that it looks stupid. This is a classic example of an idea can be scary, but it can look not scary. And if this was a book, you know, I think the idea is really solid. Like, as you say, the
that's
idea
true.
that it's just almost like, it's not even like a conscious decision from the earth. It's just like a natural response to, like, threatening levels of us harming the planet, of, like, plants do this shit. We see all sorts of things about, like, you know, parasites and cordyceps and horrifying things that nature does, and this being, like, a big example of that. But in a novel, having characters who could, like, be terrified to go outside, and you never know it once you step out of the house, and if you feel like a shift in the atmosphere around you that something's happening. But just to have characters on a screen looking quizzically at, like, billowing fields of wheat is like, that's it's not scary. Seeing people run away from wind, it's silly. It's seriously silly.
It's the least scary thing. And again, like, his, you know, again, maybe in his head he was thinking, you know, The Birds was so genius because Alfred Hitchcock took what is a quite mundane everyday thing. We all see seagulls or whatever every day, and suddenly he turned them into this terrifying threat. And I think M. Night thought he was doing that with trees and wind, right? Like, this is a thing that is around us all the time. What if it turned on us? But just visually, that's not the same as having you know, birds can be made to look threatening. You know, all animals with eyes and teeth and mouths can be made to look threatening, but an invisible, like, wind, like, that's never gonna work, you know? It's like, it was a swing and a miss.
And I think the film trips itself up in the way that it plays with the ambiguity of it all, right? Because, again, the idea is scary, that this is simply an unfathomable thing. We don't really know why it started. We don't know why it ended. We don't know why, when that person was in that field, nothing happened. Right. But when this person was then in that field, they were infected or whatever. The film is constantly playing with this, like, we're just trying to figure out what's going on. And the end of the film is saying, like, we're never going to understand this. This is just something that happened, and we kind of have to, you know, try and learn what we can, but we're never really going to know what happened or why. At the same time, then, from a purely mechanical horror level, a tension level, it feels random. But you're like, oh, well, in that sequence, nothing happened in that one, actually. That was a false alarm. But that one, well, I guess there were too many people, so it was probably that. And so you don't have any idea as a viewer of, like, taken as an example, this year, A Quiet Place Day 1, there is an excellent sequence in A Quiet Place Day 1 where there are a few stragglers walking through New York, and suddenly those stragglers become a bigger crowd, and the crowd gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you know, as the audience member, the aliens hear noise, they come and attack. And it puts you in this situation where you're like, well, this wasn't really many noise when it was one person, two people. Right. Now it's 5 people. It's getting a bit borderline. Yeah. God, now it's 100 people. Like, what is the base? Like, what constitutes a noise? And that makes you feel nervous as an audience member, because you're like, I know the rules. And the filmmaker is playing with me. I know what the filmmaker's doing in terms of like, we're going to slowly amp up the noise and you're going like, how loud is too loud? But in The Happening, because of the ambiguity of it, because we will never be able to fathom what actually happened, there are no rules to play with.
No.
And so I think my other complaint about this, other than the fact that it is just completely off the wall and all over the place, is that we kind of know everything about half an hour in. It gets going really quick.
Really quickly.
The Happening happens right at the beginning. Yeah. Pretty much half an hour in, John Leguizamo's dead. Their main friend has already got... And I'm like, God, what is the last hour of this movie then?
Yeah.
And it's kind of just more happenings. They kind of just keep going around from place to place. And then the wind picks up and everyone panics. Yeah. And then those two kids get shot and it's crazy. And so it kind of just, sets up some really interesting questions and ideas, but it doesn't establish rules that it can either play by or break. And it doesn't really know, I don't think, how to evolve that situation and to, like, crank the dial up. No. It's just like, it's happening again, or maybe it isn't. But this time it is. And also that person's a dickhead.
Right. I think that's so true. It does. It kind of slightly, like, we get that whole sort of third act section where they come across the crazy woman who lives alone in the house, right? Who they end up staying with. And that's quite a fun moment. But again, it kind of feels like it doesn't really need to belong in this film necessarily. But this kind of, isolated woman who lives by herself in the middle of nowhere, and then she starts getting all, crazy. And like, again, we get a lot of this in M. Night films, particularly things like The Visit onwards, like crazy old people. But again, there's some fun, like, genre thrills in that moment. I think the moment when she kills herself by smashing her head through the windows is quite an effective moment, and there are some good jump scares in that moment, just from a horror perspective. But it also does feel a bit like the story is kind of slightly floundering and trying to figure out what to do with itself to fit its runtime as well by that point, doesn't it? It's like, oh, we better go to another location and have another sort of more human threat at this point, and I think you can definitely feel that. You can feel the mechanics of it as you watch it.
And I think, the ending's really interesting as well, because I think it doesn't know, as you say, how to, like, build up a third act necessarily. And it also kind of doesn't know how to end, but again, in a way that, like, the idea is interesting of, like, the couple, because obviously we haven't really got into the character side of things, but Marky Mark and
there's not a whole lot to say, to be fair.
They're a weird couple. They're on the verge of breaking up. She went for dessert with a colleague and she feels really bad about it, and that's the extent of whatever cheating has been happening. And the kind of the backdrop of The Happening is going on while they're trying to sort of figure out their relationship, and they realize they really do want to be together, and they decide to stay together. And they go, oh, well, if we're going to, we can't just hide away here. We do this together, and we go out together. And then they go outside, and The Happening has stopped happening. And so they're like, oh, it's never come for us. And by that point, it's all over. And again, the idea of that is interesting. They're like, we don't know why it started, and we don't know why it ended. And it was just horrible and terrible luck if you happen to be caught up with it. And we don't know why it was in that area and not this one. All of these questions that, are spooky to comprehend in the theme of this podcast series of the nature biting back. We don't know. We can't reckon with nature. We can't fathom it. At the same time, then on a narrative level, it just plays as, oh, they went outside and actually it was done.
It's fine now.
So they're okay. It's fine now. It stopped happening.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And I'm always torn about this, because I think a weakness of some of his other films, particularly his movies that came just before this, he over-explains too much. Like the Village, I think The Village could have been such a perfect film in so many ways, and I think maybe had it ended when Bryce Dallas Howard's character just escapes over the fence and doesn't see what's on the other side of it. But the relentless then explanation where you've even got M. Night Shyamalan making a cameo to explain that they have to cancel flights from flying over this village. Honestly, like, those are the unforgivable moments in his movie where he kind of goes, huh? See what I did there? See what I did there? See what I'm explaining it so you don't question it. And I think he's reining that in a little bit in this movie. Like, he isn't giving you too many explanations, which I kind of like. But then, yeah.
You say that we're going to discuss Old in a minute, where one of my favourite things about Old is that you don't need to explain why the beach makes you old. No. And Shyamalan's like, I'm going to explain why the beach makes you old, why it's there, and what we're doing. And it's like, dude, what? We didn't need to know any of this.
No, no, exactly. But The Happening doesn't really do that. Like, it doesn't. And I kind of respect it for that. Like, there is a sort of, again, he does have too many endings, and you know that whole sequence where we get a news item and there's a person on the news talking about how this was nature biting back, literally, and kind of explains to us the way we've been treating the planet is the reason this is happening and stuff. I'm like, okay. And then you get a sequence where Zooey Deschanel and Mark Wahlberg get pregnant, right? And there's a little moment of them being happy to get, did we need that? And then we get the kind of final sting in Paris, which I liked. But yeah, I think, you know, again, that idea of him just, because it doesn't have a twist to this movie. I mean, to its credit as well, it doesn't have a twist, and it doesn't have a Shyamalan cameo too. So he's, apart from, I think he's a voice over the phone, I think that's it. But you know, in the previous movie Lady in the Water, he was playing the savior of mankind, so like at least he's toned down his cameo urge in this movie. So he's reining in some of those urges, and yet it's still just doesn't quite hang together, does it? You know,
it is bonkers. And it's, you know, it's interesting to watch this film again now, like we said, after the pandemic, of like, this thing happened that for a while we were all scared to go outside. We were told not to go outside. And how many people together is too many people is a question brought up in this film. And why did this start? And we've got, you know, ideas about what happened and how we deal with it, but at the same time it comes back up. We get pockets of COVID coming back up, and even now, you know, I've had friends this year who've been like, oh, do you know, I'm working from home this week, or I'm off because I've got COVID again, and you know, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but I feel like shit. So that whole thing of like the happening again at the end of The Happening in Paris is, you know, a scary part of it, of like, because we don't know why this thing really happened or what made it stop, there's nothing we can do. It's just going to keep happening, and we're just going to have to keep dealing with it. Is, you know, all of this stuff has additional resonance now, and it makes this film all the more fascinating, while, as we've discussed the entirety of this podcast, minute to minute, you're watching it like, what the fuck is this movie? What am I watching here? But it's full of so many ideas and things, and it's what a bizarre combination of elements it all is.
It's so interesting, and you're so right. I mean, it has so many interesting, and like you said, it could almost work better as a novel. I think there's something about putting it on screen with those performances, with those visuals, that just doesn't work for the most part, save for a few really interestingly directed set pieces. So yeah, it's a real fascinating mess of a film, but I'm not mad about it. Like, I actually really have quite a lot of fun. I'm just kind of like, I'm fascinated by what a mess it is, in a way, you know, like, because there are moments of greatness in there are moments of absolute trash, like, and it's a weird thing. I would kind of like to screen it for an audience and see what people make of it, you know,
because it has so much identity. There is a film with a real sense of identity. If you asked me what that identity is, I would not be able to tell you, but it's not bland. You know, it's not phoning it in.
No,
it's undeniably M. Night's.
Yeah.
Now more than ever in his filmography, it feels like it has context in among his other works.
Definitely, yeah.
But it's an absolutely wild one.
Absolutely wild. Well, there you go. Where does it rank for you roughly in his filmography, Ben? Kind of like lower mid, like lower, what would you say?
Yeah, lower mid. It's above, you know, the bland and rubbish ones. It's below the actually good ones. Do you know what? Maybe this is controversial. I hate Split, and so I think I'd rather rewatch this than Split. And then I weirdly quite liked Glass. I think I'm like, this is like every recent M. Night film, is like a real audience splitter.
Yes.
And I had quite a good time with Glass. I don't know why. So I feel like my personal...
Well, I love that. Well, again, it just goes to show how divisive his movies are and different people's perspectives, because a lot of people love Split, think that's like one of his best, right? And you mentioned, that there are some characters in this that are coded as neurodivergent. I think he's got a real issue with portraying neurodivergence in basically all of his movies. From Adrian Brody in The Village to everything that we see in Split. I think certain characters in Old, actually. Yeah, totally. Like, it's a really strange thing that he's got with it. But even aside from that, I think that Split is a bit baggy and a bit over the top, and I don't really understand the hype around it. But I hated Glass, absolutely hated Glass. So yeah, I'm very much like...
You would drown Glass in a puddle.
I would. I'm afraid I would. Yeah. So there you go.
Its desire is to consume all life on Earth. Only you can redeem us. He is coming.
That was a little clip you heard just there from, of course, Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, which is finally hitting cinemas in the next week. And we discussed that over on Patreon on the latest episode of Fresh Blood. Fresh Blood is our monthly review strand in which me and my co-hosts Brad Hanson, Becky Dark and Steph McKenna review all of the new releases in horror. We cover films, TV shows, books, video games, everything. And of course, this month we all sat down and discussed and debated our thoughts on the new Robert Eggers movie. So that is available for $5 patrons. We're also going to be bringing a new review of the year episode of Fresh Blood in the next couple of weeks. At the beginning of January, Becky, Brad, Steph and I are going to get together and count down our collated top 24 horror movies of 2024, which is going to be exciting. There's going to be excitement, there's going to be fights, there's going to be disagreements, there's going to be controversy. I cannot wait. So if you want to have a listen to Fresh Blood and all of the other bonus content available, then you simply need to sign up to the Evolution of Horror Patreon. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. $5 per month will get you access to Fresh Blood, but if you go to the higher tier of $10 per month, you will also get access to our exclusive mini seasons. And excitingly, in the month of January, we're going to be kicking off a found footage series for $10 patrons. We're going to be covering everything from The Borderlands to Gonjiam Haunted Asylum to Incantation to Grave Encounters and a whole bunch of other terrifying found footage movies. So if you want to get access to that, sign up at the $10 level. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. But everybody who signs up, no matter what tier, will get a little shout out on the main feed as a thank you. So speaking of, I'm going to give everybody who signed up in the month of September a little thanks. So a big thank you to Namefree23, Leo Kipp, Ray Lamont, Sean Martin, Poor, David Garrett, Lawrence B, Audin Blinks Nordid, Dean, Matthias, Christian Rank, Lesh, Mallory, Alicia Brown, Kako, Gabrielle Marin, Dylan Woods, Scott Walker, Alice Weston, Harley Kessler, Aaron Long Days, John Conway, Stephen KT, Allison, Lara Webb, Fia Long, Constance Mackenzie, Suri, Lara Kasai, Brandon Conradis, Realtors, and Kieran Cutting. A huge thank you to all of those people for signing up to our Patreon in the month of September. And one more time, if you want to join them and get regular free bonus content and more, then sign up now. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. Okay, let's return to the second half of this week's episode, in which Ben Travis and I discuss M. Night Shyamalan's Old from 2021.
So, Mike, there is a beach, and the beach makes you old.
Aha.
And this family has gone on a vacation. Gail Garcia Bernal is Guy. Vicky Creeps is Priska, his wife. They have 2 kids, and they go on this holiday to this beautiful resort that Priska, Vicky Creeps, keeps mentioning. I found it online. It came up online. Can you believe we found this holiday on the internet? As if that's not where everybody finds their holidays these days. Yeah. So they go to this resort, and while they're at the resort, they're told, hey, go to this beach. We'll take you to this special beach, this private beach, and you'll have a lovely day. They're taken to the beach with a bunch of other people. And when they get there, they realize they can't leave, because whenever they try and leave through the cave that they entered through, you pass out, you go dizzy and you pass out, so you can't leave. But also everybody there is aging at a rapid rate. So they're little kids, the real initial tell, because they one of them's 6, I think one of them's 11. Mm-hmm. They rapidly begin to grow up, but then other things start happening with all of the people on the beach. So Vicky Creeps' Priska has a benign tumor that then starts absolutely blowing up. They all seem to have some kind of affliction which rapidly amps up as time is sort of progressing through this day on the beach. Then they realize that this is the thing that there's like, you could have just had this as this allegorical tale of like, isn't it terrifying how time passes? Isn't it scary, the relentless march of time and what that does to all the people we love? But no, it goes full stupid Shyamalan. And it's like, well, the beach makes you old because there's some kind of mineral in the stone, and the particular cove that they're in is causing some weird time dilation that is accelerating everybody's cells. But actually, there's one little area of the sea that you can swim through, that you can get out of the beach that makes you old. And eventually, everybody on the beach dies, apart from the kids, who are now middle-aged. But they still have like kids' minds. It's so deeply strange. They swim through the special channel that means that they can get out of the beach, and then they discover that they have been taken to the beach on purpose by a pharmaceutical company who lured them all into the holidays in the first place, put them all on a bus, and they're like, you all have conditions, and we are going to give you like a bit of medicine or treatment or something. And rather than having to wait and see how that affects your whole life, we can just put you on the beach that makes you old for a day, track what happens to you, and we will basically make medical advancements much more quickly. So I'm really sorry that you all had to die.
Yeah.
And that you all had to like have this insane experience, but we have basically used it to make all of this medicine that is going to help humanity going forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the fact that is old.
The fact that it's all they're all guinea pigs in a giant big pharma experiment, basically, right? Like, did we need that? Did we? No, of course we didn't need that. Do you know the most heinous part of that reveal is when there's a sudden shot of M. Night Shyamalan himself looking down at everyone on the beach through a kind of lens, right, with his God's eye filmmaker view, looking directly at us through his lens. And I was like, oh God. I remember very specifically seeing, because obviously now, we were talking about how we grew up, as kids watching these Shyamalan films, me and you. Now, obviously, we would have both been working as film journalists, right, when this film came out. I remember seeing it at a press screening. Do you remember sort of seeing this movie for the first time, Ben?
I do. I went out of my way to see it, but I have to say, I was actually really like scared of seeing this film, because when it came out, it was like tapping on a lot of things that I was feeling really strongly at the time. So this is 2021, so that was the year that I turned 30, and I was really strongly feeling like the last 10 years of my life feel like they've gone so quickly. Time just feels like it is zooming past, and I never feel like I have enough time. And at that point, I can see my parents are getting a bit older. They're not really old, but I can literally see my parents getting older. I can see my siblings getting older. I'm sort of moving out from one phase of life much closer towards another phase of life, that it all just feels like it's gone like that. And I think my, personal nightmare would be having a day with my family where I just see them all like grow old and die is like there was something about that I was like, I don't want to see this movie. It's like a really upsetting thought to me, and there's something about it, and even like the trailers didn't really, I don't think, particularly give away the tone of the actual film. And they're playing into that hooky premise. There was just something about it where I was like, I can really feel that this is like an idea that gets under my skin, and maybe, the Shyamalan of my youth who made films that scared me is back in a way. And then the film came out and everyone was like, oh no, it's just stupid. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I think I maybe do need to see this then. So I went out of my way to see it. At the Brixton Ritzy, it was like a one last screening at like 9:00 on a Monday night. I was like, I've got to go and see Old. And I watched it with a relatively full audience who just like cackled the whole way through, including me. And I had, as with The Happening, kind of a great time. I think it's a more successful film than The Happening. Yeah. I think it's, achieving more of the things that it aims to, but it still is playing in this really weird tonal register that is actually a lot of fun to watch with an audience.
Yes, absolutely agree with you again with everything you said. I remember seeing it at one of those big multimedia press screenings at View Leicester Square, and there was just raucous laughter throughout that movie. Like, no one was really taking it very seriously. There were a few obviously creepy moments which we can talk about that made people jump and stuff, but generally speaking, I think everyone was just a bit like, what are we watching? And then I remember coming out and speaking to a bunch of people. There was a group of us stood out in the street afterwards talking about it, and I was like, what a fun time. That was bonkers. A couple of people really mad about it. Was just like, what a terrible piece of shit movie that was. Like, again, this movie, more successful, like you say, than The Happening. By the way, big box office success as well, actually. Made a lot of money. I think it's completely split down the middle. It's got a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. So, it really is kind of like, people love it, people hate it, people appreciate it, people really don't appreciate what it's doing. And I completely understand both perspectives. Again, for me, it's a movie that really works. I think its tone is all over the place, but it does feel, like you said, just slightly more in control of what it's doing and its tone than The Happening, which felt like it was kind of like a million different things all slipping through M. Night's fingers. I feel like it's much smaller, it's much more contained, and I think he knows exactly what he's making with this movie, right?
Yeah, and I think there's moments that he like actively plays for laughs, or at least the absurdity of the situation, and then there's dramatic moments that he like actually lets those moments be dramatic.
Yes.
And so within moment to moment, even if overall the tone of the film is veering from one thing to the other, moment to moment there is a tone to each scene, whereas in The Happening, it's like every sentence you feel like you're in a different movie.
Yeah. And again, the dialogue, what is going on with the dialogue? Because again, we've seen him write great dialogue. I mean, God, I always think to myself, Toni Collette in The Sixth Sense, right? Like, you would never know that performance and that character was from the same universe as, some of these other M. Night performances and dialogue. But like those characters, the way characters talk to each other in this. Again, I was laughing from the beginning when that scary moment when that woman has a seizure in the holiday resort, and then Ken Leung appears and is like, "Hello, I'm a nurse. My name is Jaren." Like, and he's explaining to us, the audience, who he is and what his role is in this. That doesn't feel like two people talking to each other or having a conversation, right? Again, and it's so odd.
It's really bizarre. But it feels like in some ways Shyamalan knows a bit more how to channel some of those impulses, because the son, the little boy, his whole thing is he just like goes up to people at the resort and he's like, "Hello, this is my name. What do you do for a living?" And then they tell him and he's like, "Okay," and he moves on to the next person. But it feels, it's still strange, but it's almost authentically weird little kid stuff. And it's like Shyamalan knows to channel some of the weird dialogue in that direction. So as you say, there's a little bit more control. But even so, a lot of the things that people say to each other in this film, and not even in a like, I don't mind, film cliches. I know some people really get on the high horse about like, oh, it's such a cliched script or whatever. I don't mind that, but this literally doesn't sound like people on any conceivable level. And the whole of the first act every single line of dialogue is in some way a piece of exposition, a setup for something else.
Oh my god!
Even as I said, like Vicky Creeps repeatedly saying, "We found this online. Can you believe what a deal it was?" And somebody else saying, "Oh, I think it's the dad says like, oh, that's the pharmaceutical company. Blah blah blah. I really like their drugs," or something like that. It's constant.
It's constant. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think actually, I was thinking about this as I was watching it. I had this first thought that, like, you mentioned the little boy, and I really love that little boy at the beginning. I think he's really charming and really sweet in the way that he talks to people. And M. Night Shyamalan has always been amazing since The Sixth Sense at writing children, actually. Like, he writes amazing children. He gets iconic child performances, whether it's Haley Joel Osment, whether it's little Abby Breslin in Signs or Culkin, right? Like, he creates these wonderful child characters, and there is something, I don't mean this to just sound really harsh, but there is something quite childlike in his writing, like in the way he writes stories. Like, he writes these kind of very simple, like, sort of high concept, like fantasy stories that could almost sound like they've been written by a kid in a creative writing class. And maybe that's why he's quite good at writing kids, but he's not so good at writing adults,
Yeah, and I think I just said in the happening bit, Mark Wahlberg, it sounds like a baffled and surprised child for so much of that movie. It's like everything he's hearing.
Yes.
It's like he's hearing something for the first time. He's so like got a naive perspective to him about everything.
Right.
Maybe that is just a bit of a hallmark or a sweet spot of where Shyamalan likes to write from that kind of perspective. And if you try and put that in the mouth of an adult character, it sounds really strange. But when he writes it for a kid, it's like, oh, well, this is endearing for this small child.
It's it's exact. I mean, that is Lady in the Water in a nutshell, right? I mean, it's about a fairy tale. I think it's based on a bedtime story that he would tell his kids, and then he turned it into a film. So there is definitely that element to his stories. And so when you're an adult audience watching it, you just go, what the fuck is this? So yeah, it's fascinating stuff. How do you find the visuals? Let's talk about M. Night as a director, because we've spoken a lot about his stories and the performances, but again, I think there is something really fun about the visuals in this film, the kind of handheld cinematography. It's kind of crazy, right, in the way it's edited and put together, but how do you find generally the way in which he's kind of visually telling us this story, I suppose? I
think it's a strong film on a visual level. Like, he has that backdrop of the beach, and he uses it for all that it's worth. It's a beautiful looking location. It's quite uncanny still to see like a daytime horror movie, like a beach horror movie, which obviously has lineage back to Jaws and into things like Us recently, the Jordan Peele film. And obviously Midsummer, a big part of that was like, hey, it's all in the daytime, but it's still feels weird to see like horror happening in broad daylight, or in this case like blazing sunshine on a absolutely idyllic beach. But he uses that location really well. He establishes different locations within the location. So there's the weird little kind of like rocky area, and the bit with the little pool of water, and the expanse of the beach and where it goes to, and the cliff top with the light shining at the top of the hill. So he, as much as all the dialogue's really insanely clunky, establishing the topography of the film, of where it's going to be set, of what the different areas are, I think actually is really smartly done. And he does lots of things where he will just let the characters be doing their thing across this whole stretch of the beach, and he'll just kind of move between them all with the camera.
Yes.
So we're with these characters over here, and they're discussing this, and the kids are freaking out because the kids are growing up, and then we go over here, and like Rufus Sewell's starting to crack up a bit, and why is he keep talking about, what is it, Marlon Brando,
Jack Nicholson. Yeah.
We're in a film together. And then we go over here, and the rapper, mid-sized sedan, is having a breakdown down this end of the beach, and he'll do all that in one shot, or like move between these groups. And I think that's all really well done. He captures that stuff really well. I don't know if I can say it's well directed, because the performances are bonkers, but again, I think that's what he's going for, and we have really good actors in this.
Yeah.
I think that makes a difference.
Yeah, amazing big ensemble cast, actually. Yeah, you're right. And none of the performances feel as alien as Mark Wahlberg's did in The Happening, actually. Like, you know, Gail Garcia Bernal and Vicky Krieps are not on that level, actually. Like, and I think those two kind of slightly ground the movie, and they give it its heart too. I think there's some genuinely moving moments between those two towards the end, right? And but then you go to Rufus Sewell, and that is much more the kind of wacky end of the spectrum, isn't it? And you go, what are the choices being made here with this character, you know? But yeah, I agree with you. I think the visuals are really interesting. And I think one of the things that you sort of forget about with M. Night, because I don't know, I think about his films as being quite kind of classic and mannered and, you know, beautiful to look at, but quite still and quiet. He's also very good at this kind of like handheld, manic, panic energy. Like, we think of the most iconic moment in Signs, which is kind of a found footage moment, which is the kid's birthday party and the alien crossing the garden, right? Yeah. And the camera choices in that moment. There are amazing handheld moments in The Sixth Sense, actually, where like the ghost will be in the kitchen and all the cupboards will be opened and the camera's kind of swinging about from one doorway to the next and things. Like, he's very good at that. And that's this movie all the way through, and it almost feels like it's got this kind of manic energy, and I think it feels like time is moving too fast. It's like it's running away with us. Like, we're constantly, the camera is pinging from one camera to the next, and it'll do this thing sometimes where the camera will be going round in a circle, and then people will start aging, or the kids will be slightly off camera and we'll hear their voices start to break, and they'll be growing off camera, right? And I think he makes some interesting, fun visual choices with the way he tells this story. I think, you know, as ever, the visuals aren't the issue with this movie. I think, like, behind the camera, I think he does a really good job with this film. Again, it's never boring, it's never bland, you know?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, that idea that, like, there's not enough time for the film itself. Like, the camera is rushing to keep up with everything that's happening. And I think then, purely from like a pacing point of view, as I said with The Happening, after about half an hour, you've got the gist, and it kind of just carries on for another hour. Whereas with Old, there's constantly another threat or another situation that they have to keep up with, because everybody on this beach has some kind of affliction that is going to, you know, probably cause harm to them, but also to other people. Everybody's going to have to deal with whatever's coming next. And so I think the pacing of the film is much better. It's more exciting to watch. You don't have time to be bored, because there's always the next crazy thing that's about to unfold. And as you say, you feel the camera, you feel Shyamalan kind of rushing between these things, not in a way that feels like he's rushing as a filmmaker, but that there's not enough time. And to have that feeling embedded into the film itself is really effective.
Is it almost too far the other way, right? Is it almost too much like you're getting whiplash from everything that's happening? I think that's the other thing, is that, like, within like 10 minutes, you get that extremely weird sequence where the kids grow up, they become teenagers all of a sudden, but they've still got their kid brains. Then they go off into a tent together. Then they have sex. Then she's pregnant 5 minutes later, and it's like, whoa, hang on. You're just like, what am I watching here? Like you said, the fact, like, and again, I think people really had a problem with that sequence. I think it's kind of interesting and funny and weird. It, like, I was, again, like, my mouth was just agape watching this movie for the first time. I remember just being like, what am I seeing? But that whole section, right, is one of the weirdest moments in this film.
It's so weird. It's so audacious to go there and to, you know, play it out to its conclusion. Because also the conclusion to that is really dark, that, like, they have the baby and the baby doesn't survive because it physically can't. It can't get enough sustenance because the cells are aging too quickly, and it can't get, and all the kids are like starving. The kids are like stuffing their face with food because they're going through huge growth spurts. So they've established that as part of the film. So it goes also then to a really dark place. At the same time, you're reeling from this idea of this feeling of like, what am I actually watching here? I can't believe this is happening.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there is an emotional component to that I don't think Shyamalan is going for. Again, the thing that I was worried about this film being, in a way that it was going to like affect me, of like, oh, you know, seeing your parents like age around you and that being inevitable, that then, you know, this part of the film would raise the flip side of that question of like, what is it like to be a parent? And like a minute ago, your you had like a 5-year-old boy and it feels like no time's passed at all, and then like now he's got a girlfriend, he's going to be a dad and whatever.
Yeah.
That is, you know, also an emotional thing that you could get into. And I just don't think Shyamalan's interested in any of that, because his head is too much in like, well, there's this pharmaceutical company and they're trying to age everybody up and give them the medicine. And it's like,
absolutely.
Dude, maybe that is also, is that part of the childishness that he's so caught up in the mechanics of how everything works that he just almost doesn't get the emotional implication of his own films sometimes.
I agree, but again, it's what's so bonkers about it is that you go, well, his early films were so emotional. Like The Sixth Sense makes me cry.
Yeah.
Signs has made me cry. The Village, like they are beautiful, emotional, heartfelt films. But you're right, this movie is not interested in that. It's like M. Night Shyamalan is so excited by this high concept. It's just a beat to beat. What would happen if this? What would happen if that? So yeah, what would happen if you've got a child that is prepubescent? Oh my God, he's going to go through puberty really fast. Oh my God, they're going to, reach their sexual awakening really fast. Oh my God, they're going to get pregnant. What happens if you've got a tumor? Oh my God, that tumor's going to grow really, really big, but you take it out, but also it means that you're going to heal really fast. And it's like everything is like buzzing around his, he came from a science medical background before he was a filmmaker. And I think he was just like, his brain was bursting with all these ideas, and he wants to include every single one of them in this movie in such quick succession. I almost wonder if this movie would have worked better as like a 6-part miniseries or something. Like you spend a whole hour just with that storyline of the teenagers having a pregnancy, right? You spend a whole hour, like you say, with this idea of your parents getting older, or an old couple kind of, forgetting what it even was that they were fighting about. And there's all these beautiful little morsels, right, that you almost think like, oh, there's so much more there that could have been explained in a way, or explored rather in a way,
And all those things are like, look, that would have made it better. Having that emotional component would have made it better. If it was a series and you had time to get into all of that, that would have made it better. If you had, 6-hour-long episodes and it's still set across the day and you get to like focus on different pockets of storylines, that surely would be better. At the same time, then the flavour of what this film ends up being, as you say, is this madcap rush that it all happens in the space of one film, one day on the beach, and it's rapid and it's happening. I think there's something about like if it was a 6-part series, that's almost too much time to tell a story about time passing too quickly.
Yeah, good point.
And so it's just this weird predicament where like the film is so flawed and it's so weird, but I'm glad it exists in the way that it does, and that Shyamalan's in this place where, as we've been saying, he self-funds his stuff. He takes his profits from his previous work, plows it into the next one, makes deals with studios for distribution. But on something like Old, he made the film he wanted to make. He did not have to make studio notes. He just did his own thing. And sometimes it works because Old made a bunch of money. Sometimes it doesn't because Trap didn't make much money, I don't think.
No.
And for better or worse, we end up with these films that are pure Shyamalan through and through. Yeah. And I think all the things that we discuss, would make this more emotionally satisfying and resonant and really dig into the ideas. But it wouldn't have then been the wild Shyamalan film that we're now discussing if he'd have done all those things. It's such a weird predicament.
Okay, now comes the part of the episode where I'm going to thank our next 30 Kickstarter backers for helping us to create Final Cut, the official Evolution of Horror card game. So a big thank you to Paul Moransky, Alexa Pace, Florian Renee, Dorian Wright, Clint Bishop, Barbara Dale, Hayden Carroll, David Weston, The Pale Bird Reuben, Aaron Kelly, Katie H, Trevor Paulson, Louise Sherwell, Dominic Harrison, Asia Prito, KK Chung, Dave Ward, William R. Mosley, Ethan Anselm, John Michael Ely, Wolfborn, Esperico, Jacob Seifert, Dan Brownlee, Polanski, Andrea, Stephen Fuller, Lev Javave, Megan North, and Darla Crowley. A huge thank you to those 30 people for supporting Final Cut, the official Evolution of Horror card game. Our Evolution of Horror shop is closed currently for Christmas, but will be reopening on January the 3rd. So if you want to pick up your copy of Final Cut from next week, then head on over to evolutionofhorror.com/shop.
let's talk about the more sort of quote-unquote horror elements to this film, like the Rufus Sewell turning into a raging psychopath, basically, and stabbing people to death. Again, it feels so... all of a sudden, that moment where you're just like, again, what am I watching? Like, he's just constantly stabbing and slashing at people, right? You've got all these characters with these different kind of, different conditions, different afflictions and everything, and they're kind of really, they're painted in their broadest strokes, I think, all of them, aren't they? In order to kind of show the effect that time and nature has on it when it's sped up, you know?
Yeah, the Rufus Sewell one is classic M. Night not doing a particularly sensitive job of like mental health topics. He is, I think he's schizophrenic. He's maybe got other sort of just neurological disorders, and that turns him into a stabby crazy man who everybody has to run away from on the beach.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, M. Night, this is also why I don't like Split. And I think my favourite one is it the calcium deficiency? You've got the lady who then becomes a sort of gnarled like monster, effectively, because all of her joints seize up and her body is all misshapen because of this weird calcium condition that she has. And so that, again, is a really cool idea.
Really cool.
Makes for really gnarly effects and really well done. Really spooky.
Yeah, agreed. I think those moments visually, again, great. The calcium deficient woman crawling through the cave looking like some sort of monster from a Wreck movie or something, I think is great. Like, that stuff, really fun. Again, like, just great fun set pieces in this movie. Like, if you put to one side, like, the lack of emotion, the slight lack of sensitivity to some of these kind of, like, conditions that he's exploiting for the genre, it's still a really fun watch. Like, it's a romp, isn't it, for sure? And I loved all of those moments. I wish it had ended about 10 minutes earlier than it did. Again, we do not need that final coda, epilogue, whatever you want to call it, where we're in the lab and everything gets explained to us, you know?
There's so much of this that I don't think we need.
Yeah.
Like, again, maybe I need to let go of my idea of what I thought this film was going to be that sounded really scary to me. But, like, you don't need to explain why the beach makes you old. The family go to a beach and it's this freak phenomenon, they can't leave. And, like, with The Happening, we will never fathom it. We don't know what's happening here. And we just see characters having to deal with it. And that lets you get into the emotional side of things. When I was watching it for the first time, realizing, oh my God, he's going to provide like a quote-unquote rational explanation for why the beach makes you old. Even in that moment, I was like, this is incredible. I don't know why you're doing this. It's so dumb.
Yeah.
And then to go to the next level of the pharmaceutical trials and the drugs and the weird, like, what is the moral of that ending? Are we supposed to be okay with it because we get medical advancements out of it? Are we supposed to be like, boo, medical advancements, that's, you know, oh, that's so unethical what you did to those people? Or are we supposed to be like cheering for the fact that all these people were shipped on a bus to the beach that makes you old? His endings and the questions that they pose, I don't want to spoil it here, so I won't, but his next film after this was Knock at the Cabin, which I think for a lot of people, they were like, hey, this is real, return to form Shyamalan. And I was kind of with them for maybe about 80% of it, and then the end of that film I hated.
Yeah.
And I was like, do you know, like, what not that everything has to be a message, but what message or moral are you getting across here? The way that you've ended this story, what are the values inherent to that story? And Old is another weird one where it's like, are we supposed to be booing or cheering, or what are we supposed to think at the end?
Yeah. No, totally. I agree with that. Like, again, if he didn't over-explain all of that, it wouldn't have mattered. I think it would have been this lovely, again, like, sort of B-movie mystery, high concept, leave that mystery open, you know, take a leaf out of Lost's book, you know? Like, it could have just been a magical beach where
Yes.
things happen and time goes a bit timey-wimey. In fact, this could be in the same universe as Lost, you know? You never know.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I think, again, like, he cannot help himself. He cannot help but be like, now it's time for M. Night to come on screen and give you the message. Tell us, like, it's like Jerry Springer's final thoughts. It's like M. Night's final thoughts. Here they come, everybody,
Yeah.
you know? And it's like, no, don't do this.
I mean, even The Happening ending with the news reports saying, we'll never know why this is happening. It's the Earth, it hates us, but we'll never truly... It's like, dude, we get it.
Yeah.
I've just watched the
get
film.
it.
We get it already. It's fine.
Oh, man. Yeah. But, you know, yes, we could spend all this time listing its flaws. It's still a really fun watch, I would say.
It's
you know?
really fun. And I do think retroactively, this film makes The Happening make more sense. They absolutely feel of a piece with each other, even down to the emotional component of the film. Like, the emotional driver is this couple have basically sort of fallen apart.
Yeah.
And will they choose to remain together? And, you know, that is to whatever degree there is an emotional component to The Happening, that is the Marky Mark and Zooey Deschanel story, and that is the story with Vicky Creeps and Gail Garcia Bernal here. They've like taken their kids basically on one last holiday together before they have to tell them we're breaking up. And then over the course of the film, as you say, like they get to a point of like, do we even know what we're arguing about anymore? And they die together on the beach of old age. They choose to stay together and die together. Yes, it's been the course of a day, but it gives you a bit of emotional resolution there. So that's what's also baffling, though, because he is then trying to provide some kind of emotional story in with the craziness of everything else going on, but it's not the stuff that you would expect him to try and create some sort of emotional pathos from. It's absolutely bizarre.
Because it's kind of I think that's kind of a beautiful moment, that moment in isolation, that moment where the two of them are all together on the beach and die together. Like, that is a really beautiful moment. It just, like you say, the rest of the film is not doing that.
No, not at all. And so, yeah, it's an interesting one. Like, The Happening and Old, when you put this together as an episode, I was like, okay, that's cool. They're both Shyamalan. I guess they are both like Nature Bites Back movies in their own weird way. But they are more connected than you'd think. And I just think in terms of like tone and feel, and maybe what we are starting to enjoy more about Shyamalan now, like as we said, when The Happening came out, it was so maligned, and probably rightly so. But Old, as much as you correctly say that it was pretty split opinion-wise, and every opinion within that spectrum is valid and correct. Yeah. A lot of the enjoyment people were getting from it was like, do you know what? Go for it, Shyamalan. You make your crazy movie, and I'll have a really great time watching it. And I think that's something that we maybe like and want from him now. And I feel like, I haven't seen it yet, but the reaction to Trap kind of seemed like the same thing.
Yeah. Very similar.
Half of people going like, do you know what? It's absolute bollocks. What a waste of my time. And the other half of people going like, yeah, it was bollocks, but I had such a good time. What a crazy ride.
Yeah, I completely right. And I wonder if there's also, because cinema has changed so much since his early career, we're sort of missing nowadays theatrical releases of sort of small to medium-sized movies that are not based on existing IP, that are its own thing, not part of a franchise. You know, we got loads of them 20 years ago when Shyamalan was in his early career, so it wasn't like a big deal. Whereas now, in some ways, because he's self-financing it himself, he's one of the only people out there that is able to make these movies that are like small to medium-sized budget, like a completely original story, one that we just go, oh, that might be good, it might be shit, but let's go see it at the cinema with an audience and have a good time. Because so many of those types of movies these days, if they're made by studios, would probably just go straight to streaming, right? You know, and it's kind of cool that with him we're still getting that theatrical experience with these kind of like, silly schlocky B movies in a way.
Yeah, and it's this mix of like, on the one hand, early in his career, he was really good at branding himself. He created a brand for himself, and he made M. Night Shyamalan the name to look out for when you're looking for new films. So he kind of established that early on. And then now at the point where he is making stuff that is more eccentric or idiosyncratic, having the financial control, having the power to make the stuff that he wants to make, combined with his name appeal, he's like, the quality is all over the place, and yet he does exist sort of in this lineage with maybe your Christopher Nolans and your Jordan Peele's of just like, here is a name that you associate with a certain type of original, unique thing. And maybe with Jordan Peele and Christopher Nolan, you have a higher expectation of what those things will be, but nevertheless, you do know what to expect from Shyamalan. He is part of that group.
He absolutely is, and I actually do see a bit of a parallel between Jordan Peele and M. Night Shyamalan. I think Jordan Peele has actually even spoken about that in interviews. There is something of the first three movies of Jordan Peele. There is something that replicates the first three movies of Shyamalan, I think, and the direction that Jordan Peele's career is going in, that it feels very authored by him. It's very much his property, his original stories. Beyond his first basically perfect movie are two slightly bigger, more ambitious movies that are slightly flawed in certain ways, but still you kind of want to love them and enjoy the ride, and there is something kind of similar. So yeah, I agree. There aren't many of those filmmakers still about these days, and I love when we have them. I really, really do. I think if M. Night is just going to keep on funding his own weird, stupid little movies, I am going to keep going to see them.
Yeah, and he does it quickly as well. Like, I don't know what he's doing next, but it was like Old came out, and he basically already shot Knock at the Cabin. And then Knock at the Cabin's coming out, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm in the middle of shooting my new movie, Trap. And it's like, he can't be stopped because he has the power to do that for himself.
Yeah, and I think he genuinely enjoys it. Yeah,
he does. Can I just say as well, I am fully entering the group of people who believe that Nope is Jordan Peele's best work.
Oh, good.
He smashed it on the... Are you doing Nope? Does that count as Nature Bites Back?
Do you know what? I was thinking about it, because in my head it was more of a kind of alien invasion movie, but actually it kind of could work in this series. There are parallels, right? And I think I'm dying to watch that film again, because I really liked it first time round, but I've only seen it the once, and I think it's one of those movies that had so many ideas and so much going on. I'd like to see it a second time. Yeah. Game
changer on multiple watches. I didn't like it massively first time around. Like I genuinely was like a bit put off by it, and then I was like, maybe I'm being stupid. Went to see it again, and was like knocked out by it, and then saw it again, and was like, holy shit, this is crazy. I did not find that about Old. I enjoyed watching Old again, but it was still stupid. It wasn't me, it was the film.
It was still Old, absolutely, yeah. And that's the thing, right? They're not these big, dense movies that you're going to get more out of on rewatch. They are a watch once, ideally with an audience, laugh together, enjoy it together, don't take it too seriously, basically. And that's the case with so many of those Nature Bites Back movies, actually. So there you go. So just to wrap up then, speaking of, actually I want to finish by quickly asking you, Ben, off the top of your head, what's your top 3 M. Night Shyamalan movies?
Oof. Oh my God. Okay. I will say the one that I actually really haven't rewatched in a long time is The Sixth Sense. I haven't seen The Sixth Sense since I was like a teenager. And so that is probably in my top 3, but it's been so long that I would need to go back and confirm that. But I recently found out, I am pretty sure my wife doesn't know the twist in The Sixth Sense.
What?
So I'm like, whenever the time comes, there may be an opportunity to watch The Sixth Sense with somebody who doesn't know the twist. And now one of my missions in life is to just try and shield her from that twist at any point that it may come up, so that we get that experience watching it together. So, oh my God. I will say, I'm going to take The Sixth Sense out, because that will be up there, but it can't be in my top 3 because I just haven't seen it recently enough. With that in mind, probably Unbreakable at 1. 2 would be Signs, which I think is incredible for so much of the runtime, and is one of the most valuable like post 9/11 movies, and is a great alien invasion film, and is so Spielbergian and has incredible suspense, and the craft of it is outstanding. We won't talk about who the lead in that film is. Then my number 3 would probably be The Village, which, is flawed, and especially, as you said, in the sort of treatment of the Adrian Brody character.
Yeah.
But the big bruised heart of that film, I think, is really affecting. I don't think the twist is particularly stupid. I just think the way it's deployed is kind of stupid.
Totally. Yeah,
and
totally. It's an amazing idea.
Bryce Dallas Howard is amazing in it. Yeah, the idea is so strong and really plays into, as I said, like the big bruised heart of that film. That is a film that is, reeling from what a hard world this can be to live in at times. I think that's a really kind of beautiful and powerful film in a lot of ways. The sort of monstery stuff is really fun. Bryce Dallas Howard is great. It's really visually strong. It's beautiful to look at. Sounds great. Just sort out the Adrian Brody stuff and take Shyamalan out of the end, and you'd be onto an absolute winner. So that's my personal top 3. But The Sixth Sense should and would be in there.
No, but they're all amazing choices. Yeah, mine is a very boring top 3 in the way that it is those first 3 big movies. It would probably go The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable Signs, to be honest. And then it would be The Village closely after that. You can't argue with those top 4, I think, right? They are all just beautiful movies. Yeah,
the most consistent drop off of all time from
it's true, isn't it? It really is. It really is. And then it goes a bit up and down in the latter half of his career, doesn't it? I think then as we've discussed for the last couple of hours, it then just comes down to personal taste as to whether you will choose to completely reject a movie like Old or Split or Glass, or whether you want to embrace it. And like you said, I think any response to those films is valid, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, there you go. Well, Ben, thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I've loved discussing these movies with you. My final question for you: what is your favourite movie in this whole kind of subgenre? Your favourite Nature Bites Back film?
Oh God, it's the most boring answer possible, but it's Jaws, isn't it?
It has to be, doesn't it?
It's got to be Jaws.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't know. I'm not going to say all-time favourite, but recently I thought Crawl was really good.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah.
The Killer Croc one. And I think it had a really good sense of it's quite a vicious film. And I think to make these films work, you have to feel the snapping of the jaws of whatever creature you are putting on screen. And with that film, I think I really felt the danger.
Yeah.
So I had a great time with that. That is an absolutely watch it once and probably chuck it away, but what a great one watch.
So good. And genuinely quite scary. It's really good. Yeah.
Yeah, properly scary. And then we'll chuck in Nope. I'm going to say Nope counts.
Nice.
And that's in there as well.
Love that. Excellent choices. Amazing. Well, Ben, thank you so much. Just remind people where they can find more Ben Travis in the world and all of your other work that you're doing.
Yeah, all sorts of places. So I'm on staff at Empire Magazine, primarily on the website, but you'll find me writing in the magazine every month. You'll find me writing daily news stories and features and all sorts and reviews. Find my stuff at empireonline.com. I'm also the co-host of the Disneyversity podcast. That is, if this is the evolution of horror, that is like the evolution of Disney. It's film by film through all of the animated Disney classics, including Mike came on for our episode talking about The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which was such a fun episode.
So good.
And we are in the doldrums of the mid-2000s at the moment. We're in a dark, dark time for the Disney studio. But yeah, even if you don't think Disney's your thing, if you like animation, if you like film history podcasts, we've been covering from the 1930s to now the mid-2000s and everything that's happened through that time. So yeah, Disneyversity, come and find us. And I am regrettably still on Twitter at Ben S. Travis. I'm on Instagram at Ben S. Travis as well. So I'm in lots of places. You can't miss me.
Amazing. Ben, thank you so much for joining me.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. It's been amazing.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. And one more time, a huge thank you to my brilliant guest, Ben Travis. I loved discussing those two films. What a fun pairing. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you make of these films? Do you want to stick up for The Happening and Old, or do you think they're total garbage? Please do get in touch. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on the socials, Instagram, Facebook, and you can find me on Blue Sky under Mike Muncer. You can find this podcast in all the usual podcast places, and if you get a spare minute, I'd be so grateful if you could drop us a little rating and review on your podcast app of choice, as that always really helps us get discovered by new listeners. So, on to next week then, our first episode of 2025, and we are continuing with Nature Bites Back movies of the 21st century. So next week I'm going to be joined by Maha Al-Badrawi, and we are going to be discussing two kind of bro horrors from the late 2000s. We're going to be talking about The Ruins from 2008 and Frozen, not the Disney version, from 2010. It's going to be a fun one. Join us next week for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.